Many people of my age have only seen Sri Lanka in a dire state. We've seen the country worsen economically, socially, in terms of human rights. We've also seen Sri Lanka worsen in terms of its global standing. People of my age have also seen Sri Lanka become largely irrelevant in global discussions. At the age of 33 years old, I can say that I can distinctly feel that Sri Lanka has deteriorated over the course of my life alone. But it hasn't always been this way. Sri Lanka, or I should say Ceylon, was actually a highly developed country, attracting tourists, settlers, migrants, business people and all kinds of people from around the world. Even as late as the 1940s and 50s, Ceylon was synonymous with cosmopolitanism, diversity, opportunity and stability. People actively chose to immigrate to and settle in Ceylon. People from the European continent, the Middle East, Africa, from North America, and even South and Central America. These people were the ancestors of the over 20 separate ethnic groups we have in Sri Lanka. If you're interested in learning more about the different ethnic groups in Sri Lanka, I have a short video I've made, and I'll put the link in the description below. Even as recently as the past 70 years, Ceylon was seen as a model country. It was a member of the UN, and it was a founding member of the non-aligned movement at a time when a lot of the world was divided between East and West. And Ceylon was a place with a relatively high standard of living compared to its neighboring countries, an extremely high level of literacy, and a place that was self-sufficient and sustainable, and most importantly, stable. And this isn't just a feeling. There is evidence to back this up. Based on available data, Sri Lanka had a net positive migration rate until the early 1950s. Now, what this means is that until the early and mid 1950s or so, more people immigrated into Sri Lanka than left Sri Lanka. So people from Europe, China, India, the Middle East, North America, and so on, all immigrated in to settle and find ways of living in Ceylon. This means that Ceylon was more like modern-day Australia or Canada or the United States in terms of the fact that many more people want to immigrate to those countries than want to leave them. Sadly, all of this changed in the 1950s. Disastrous policies like the Sinhalese-only policy, multiple ethnic riots, corruption and political instability, economic and political mismanagement, and worsening rights for minorities all led to a mass migration out of Sri Lanka. Although this process began in the 1950s and 60s, it has been going on ever since. Now, this change in migration patterns is very recent. The 1950s was around the age of my parents' generation, just before my parents were born. This means that the change in migration patterns is fairly recent, only about a generation ago. What this means is that it's created a net negative migration rate since the 1950s. I am one of those people who's had to leave Sri Lanka and contributed to that net negative migration rate. Mass immigration out of Sri Lanka is still a novel concept to many. Many people are only now learning to adjust to the reality that parts of their family may have to live abroad, or that they themselves will have to leave their own country and live abroad. Families are being torn apart. Parents are missing out on time with their children. Grandparents are missing out on the opportunity to watch their grandchildren grow. Families are missing out on unity. And generations of Sri Lankans are now beginning to be born abroad and losing connection with the country that their parents came from. And it doesn't look like this trend will change anytime soon. Now, I said that this is a novel concept to many Sri Lankans. And that might sound strange at first, because many people my age have only known people wanting to leave the country. However, let me give you an analogous example of how recent this phenomenon is in Sri Lanka. If we compare Sri Lanka to a region like Scotland or Ireland, we can see that immigration in those regions started a lot earlier. In the 1700s and 1800s, there was mass immigration outside of Scotland and Ireland. In the case of Scotland, this was because of the Highland clearances and other colonial policies, which severely disadvantaged the local populations living there. The mass immigration outside of Scotland and Ireland were due to harmful and somewhat brutal policies that drove people away from those countries and forced them to settle abroad. An example of this is the Highland clearances or the Irish potato famine. The communities that left Ireland and Scotland often faced huge amounts of discrimination in the new places that they settled in. And as they attempted to establish communities elsewhere and rebuild their sense of home and identity, these communities faced discrimination, hardship, and a lot of adversity when trying to settle in the new countries they tried to make their home. And slowly but surely, these communities became gradually removed from their original home country and its culture and history. Much like modern day Sri Lankans who have to settle in new countries. They had to learn new languages, just like modern day Sri Lankans had to learn new languages. They had to learn new ways of thinking, just like modern day Sri Lankans have to learn new ways of thinking. They had to learn a new way of perceiving the world, as well as a new set of cultural norms and languages and cultures that they had to accustom themselves to working with. This is why there are so many established Scottish and Irish communities all over the world, particularly in North America and in Australia, in New Zealand, and even in England. And slowly but surely, Sri Lankan communities are beginning to establish themselves in the same way throughout the former British Commonwealth and in other countries as well. So what this example illustrates is the fact that immigration is still a novel concept, or that it's a concept that many Sri Lankans are still grappling with. Immigration on a mass scale is still a relatively new concept for many of us, because historically, Ceylon was a stable enough place that people didn't have to immigrate. Now, growing up, I've always been told that Sri Lanka is going to improve, that one day Sri Lanka will be a developed country, or that it'll become stable and prosperous, or that it'll become a better place to live one day. Sadly, this is a belief that I've had to learn to let go of over the course of my life. Having studied the decline of Sri Lanka and its gradual reduction in importance globally, as well as the worsening situation in the country both economically and politically, I've come to the conclusion that Sri Lanka's decline cannot be meaningfully arrested. In other words, I don't think Sri Lanka will actually improve as a place to live, at least not for the majority of the population. But it makes me proud to know that until very recently, only about a generation ago, Ceylon was a stable, prosperous, and geopolitically important country. If you want to know more about Sri Lankan history, culture, multiculturalism, and social and mental health issues in Sri Lanka, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.